How's everybody doing tonight? All right, that was okay. I'll give you about a 4 out of 10 on that one. 2 weeks ago was better. Well, I'm glad to be back tonight. Last week, some of you may not have even known I was gone, other than I wasn't up here. But I went on vacation with my boys. We took them back with my dad, and we went to the OU Baylor game, and just had a great, relaxing week, and it was awesome. So, but I'm glad to be back. I'm glad to be bringing this message to you. We are continuing through our series of sermons on messy life, where we look at the heroes of faith from Hebrews 11. We look at how they fell into sin, but how God still continues to use them. And tonight, we are going to be looking at the life and the fall of Moses. All right, and Moses is an interesting one. Most of us know Moses for all of the good things he did, and I think that's something that he needs to be accredited to him. But there's also a lot of not so great things. Before we start this message and dive into it, I wonder how many of you have ever been in a situation where you were told or asked to do something and you didn't feel ready, all right? How many of you have ever been in that situation, right? Yeah, most of us have. Most of us have been in that situation, and if you haven't, don't worry, you will. I remember one particular example of this is I had just gotten married to my beautiful wife, who's not here tonight. She's preparing for a trip to Guatemala tomorrow. And we had just gotten married, and our first year of marriage, I will just say, was not the ideal first year of marriage that you would want. We only spent 180 days or nights together during that first year out of the 365. 9 days after we got married, I went to provide relief to Hurricane Katrina for about a month and a half. I came back from that and I started working at a job as a night shift supervisor. So we literally saw each other only about 2 hours a day, if that. An hour for breakfast and then an hour or two for dinner when she got done with school, because we were just constantly busy. And then I took another job in Fresno, where I moved to Fresno, and she stayed in Riverside and finished up her schooling and part of the choir responsibilities that she was a part of. And so from April until July, we were living in two different places as our first year of marriage. And so it was a very rough first year, if you will. Well, during that first year, in about April or May, I get a call from my wife, and she sounds scared. And I go, "What's wrong?" And she goes, "I'm pregnant." And I said, "Okay, are you sure?" "Yes, I took a pregnancy test." I said, "Okay, that sounds great. Did you take another one to make sure?" She says, "I've taken 14. That's not an exaggeration. She took 14, and she bought the expensive ones, okay? Ladies, after you take the first 3, just go to the doctor and find out for sure. Don't spend all that money on those expensive pregnancy tests. She goes, "I took 14. I go, "Okay. Well, do you have an appointment to the doctor?" "Yes." "Okay, that's great." And we were very nervous. We weren't ready for that, but it was coming, and we had to get ready. And it's been the greatest blessing of our lives up until this point. And it has been amazing to have a child and a son, even though we didn't expect it, even though we didn't want it, and even though we weren't ready. And when I say we didn't want it, it didn't mean that we didn't want kids. We knew that there was still 3 more months or 2 more months before we would be together. And it was a very nervous time for us. We did want kids, and we're very thankful for my oldest son, some days. But I'm just kidding. But that's a very scary time. And tonight we're going to look at a situation with Moses. We're going to look at a couple of failures in his life. But the main one that we're going to be focused on tonight is where God called him to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt, and he wasn't ready, and he didn't want to do it, and he had a very strong lack of faith. And we're going to look at what he said and how he went through this as we go through this chapter. But I don't this message is going to be negative enough on Moses, so I want to kind of build him up because he really is a remarkable guy. He really did a lot of things by faith, and anybody that can lead thousands, tens of thousands of people through the wilderness for 40 years is probably one of the greatest, if not the greatest, leader of all time in all of human history. I would put him number 2, first being King David, who I believe is the greatest ruler and king of all time, and we're going to look at him in just a few weeks. But let's look at Moses and what it says in Hebrews chapter 11, and then we'll be moving to Genesis chapter 2, 3, and 4, and Numbers 20. All right? Here's what it says, verse 23 in Hebrews 11. By faith, Moses, after he was born, was hidden by his parents for 3 months, because they saw that the child was beautiful, and they did not fear the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, and chose to suffer with the people of God, rather to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. For he considered reproach for the sake of Christ to be greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, since he was looking ahead to the reward. By faith, he left Egypt behind, not being afraid of the king's anger, for Moses had persevered as one who sees him who is invisible. By faith he instituted the Passover and the sprinkling of the blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch the Israelites. By faith he crossed the Red Sea as though they were on dry land, and when the Egyptians attempted this, they were drowned. So Moses has this amazing long list of faithful acts that he follows and that he performs. And he's really a remarkable guy, but even though he had all of these amazing acts of faith, his faith wasn't always rock solid. And so I want to give you a little bit of background if you're unfamiliar with Moses. Hopefully most of you have at least heard of him. But Moses is a pretty unique guy. Israel was slaves in Egypt. He was born into slavery. And in fact, they were being so prosperous and growing so much that Pharaoh saw this and said, we've got to do something about this, so we need to kill all the male babies by throwing them into the Nile River. So he makes this decree and this edict, and Moses is born shortly after this. His parents, as it said in the text, said that he was beautiful and they didn't want to throw him away, so they kept him hidden for about 3 months. Right? They kept him hidden and protected him. But once he got too big to try to hide and keep away, they obeyed Pharaoh. Kind of. They threw him into the river, but they threw him into the river with the basket that was sealed with pitch and made a little boat. And by the grace and plan of God, Moses' boat ran down the Nile River and happened to come across Pharaoh's daughter. And Pharaoh's daughter saw this child and fell in love with how beautiful he was and decided to adopt him and make her his own son. Now, Moses' sister plays a very important role, and we get to see a little bit of her faith here, because by faith, she was, or not by faith, at the request of her mother, she was following the basket down the river, and she sees Pharaoh's daughter pick up the basket, look at the child, and fall in love with him. And she crawls out of the reeds and goes to Pharaoh's daughter, which was probably unheard of at the time for a slave to approach her. And she goes, hey, I know somebody, if you need a nurse or a nanny, I know somebody that would be great at that. And the Pharaoh's daughter goes, yeah, I do. I need somebody to take care of this baby. And so by the grace and the mercy of God, Moses' mother was able to raise him as a young child until he was weaned and was of age to go and be a part of Pharaoh's household. Amazing story, amazing coincidences. They weren't coincidences. They were the hand of God. And it's a beautiful thing to see that his mother got to instruct him and give him his Hebrew roots and teach him the important things about who they were and where they came from. He then went into Pharaoh's home. He was educated in the Egyptian school system. He was treated as a son of Pharaoh, or of Pharaoh's daughter, as a grandson of Pharaoh. He grew to be a strong young man, and he was groomed to be Pharaoh. Now, whether or not he would actually ever become Pharaoh, we don't know. But as a child of Pharaoh's daughter, as a grandchild of Pharaoh, he would be trained to take over just in case it came and the rule fell to him. So he was trained to be a leader of Egypt. But then we pick up the passage in chapter 2, verse 11, and it tells us this: years later, after Moses had grown up, he went out to his own people and observed the forced labor. He saw an Egyptian strike a Hebrew, one of his people, and looking around and seeing no one, he struck the Egyptian dead and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting, and he asked the one that was in the wrong, "Why are you attacking your neighbor?" The man replied, "Who made you commander over us? Are you planning on killing me like you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses became afraid and thought, "What I did is certainly known." And when Pharaoh heard about this, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to the land of Midian, and he sat down by the well. Here's Moses, raised by his mother, then raised in the house of Pharaoh. He knows the importance of his people. He cares for his people. He was trying to protect them one Egyptian at a time. He wanted to be courageous. He wanted to help save his people, but he went about it the wrong way. He murdered a man in trying to protect his people. We don't even know if he saved the guy that was being whipped or if he was just sneaking up on this guy. But what we do know is that Moses knew it was wrong, because the text tells us he looked around, saw no one, and then he killed the dude. So he knew what he was doing was wrong. And he committed the sin, an atrocious sin, of murdering someone else. He had accepted his people. He loved them, was even willing to go and defend them. But as we see just a few verses later, his people didn't accept him. They rejected him. This one guy, stubborn old man probably, was like, "What are you going to do? Why are you coming to me? You're going to kill me like you killed the other guy?" And they rejected Moses. And the fact that Moses was placed in this place of privilege is probably something that rubbed a lot of these Hebrews wrong. And it was something that this image and this picture here of this man rejecting him is probably a little bit of foreshadowing to what would come with Moses as he led the people out of Egypt. Because throughout their journey through the wilderness, they constantly were criticizing and making Moses' life miserable. In fact, in Numbers chapter 20, verses 8 through 12, we pick up a story where Moses had led Israel to the land of Zin. And in Zin, there wasn't much water. And so the people began grumbling and criticizing Moses. And they came to him and they said, "Hey, get us some water, dude. We're thirsty. Help us out here." And so Moses and Aaron did what was right. They went and they laid at the door of the tabernacle and they prayed for God for wisdom. And in verse 8, we pick up and it says, "The Lord spoke to Moses, 'Take the staff and assemble the community. You and your brother Aaron are to speak to the rock while they watch, and it will yield water. You will bring water for them out from the rock and provide a drink for their community and their livestock.' So Moses took the staff of the Lord's out of the Lord's presence, just as he had commanded him. Moses and Aaron summoned the assembly in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, 'Listen, you rebels! Must we bring water out of this rock for you?' Then Moses raised his hand and he struck the rock twice with his staff, so that an abundance of water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. But then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, 'Because you did not trust me to demonstrate my holiness in the sight of Israel, you will not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them.' These were the waters of Meribah, where the Israelites quarreled with the Lord, and he demonstrated his holiness to them." The people were complaining against God. They were complaining against Moses. They originally started off doing what was right. They laid down, they prayed, they asked God for help, and God went to them and said, "Hey, speak to the rock and water will come out of this." This is the second time God had given him an instruction like this. The first time he said, I want you to tap the rock. But now God was going to leave no doubt that it was him that was providing for the people of Israel. I don't want you to tap the rock. I don't want you to touch the rock. I just want you to speak to it, and my power will be shown. And he was trying to make a statement to the people of Israel of how powerful God was. But after about 38, 39 years of traveling through the wilderness with these tens of thousands of complaining Israelites, Moses lost it. He blew his top. He got angry at the people and he struck the rock. Psalm 106, 23 through 26 states to us that it was the people who drew him to anger, that he lost his temper because they were pushing him. So we get that confirmation. Moses even went a little step further. Not only did he strike the rock, but if we look at what he says here, who does he say is going to bring the water out of the rock? Does he say God? No. He says we, me and Aaron. Do we need to bring this water out of the rock to prove to you that we're all going to be okay? In his anger, he lost sight of the things that were important. Now what's amazing here is that God still delivered the water. An abundance of water still came out. And think about this, okay? You think, okay, hey, he struck the rock and water came out and they were able to drink. But it says the community and their livestock, okay? We're talking here over 10,000 people. I don't have the number off the top of my head. But then livestock for 10,000 people. This isn't just a little trickly stream that's coming out of here. This is like an ocean, a lake of water coming out of this rock so that everybody can feed and everybody can drink. Must have been an amazing miracle to see happen, but God still brought it out. But because they messed up, God punished them. Now what's interesting here is why God punished him. In verse 12, it shows us that they weren't disciplined because of their actions. They were disciplined because of what? Their lack of faith in God. And I think that's something that's so interesting. They didn't get to enter the promised land because of their lack of faith. And this is at the very end of their role as the leaders of the people of Israel. But Moses' lack of faith in God is seen throughout his ministry, and it all starts back in Exodus chapter 3 where we left off. Moses killed a man. He ran to the land of Midian. He found a wife. He worked for her father-in-law, and one day while he was tending the sheep, tending the flocks, he saw a bush on fire. But the bush wasn't burning up. So he goes to this bush, and in the bush, God speaks to Moses, and he tells him, I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at him. And then something interesting happens. God goes, hey, remember how excited you were to go and protect the people of Israel years ago, about 40 years ago when you killed that guy? Well, guess what? Now I'm going to let you free them for real. You're going to get to do it. You're going to go and you're going to lead the people out. You're going to go and you're going to go talk to Pharaoh. And you're going to tell him, let my people go. And he's not going to do it right away, but don't worry. I'm going to send my plagues and you will lead the people out and you are going to be my prophet. You are going to be the leader of the people of Israel. You'd think Moses would be jazzed. You think he would be all about that. He loved his people. He cared about them. We saw that earlier. But yet, that's not the way that it turned out. When God approaches Moses and begins to tell him this, Moses just comes up with a bunch of excuses. And so for the rest of this passage, I want us to look at these excuses, because we can really see where his lack of faith comes in. The first excuse is found in chapter 3, verse 11. And it says this. But Moses asked God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring Israel out of Egypt? So what's the first thing that he says? Who am I? Why are you asking me? I'm a nobody. I've killed a guy. I've done all these things. Who am I? And at first it seems really noble. It seems that he's saying, look, I'm insignificant and I'm inadequate. But really, as we go on and we see these excuses that God brings, or that Moses brings to God, we see that there was a different motive in there. He was feigning being inadequate. He was feigning being insignificant. He was just trying to find an excuse for God to go, yep, you're right. Sorry, I'm not going to use you. I'm going to go use somebody else. But I love what God says to him. God says to him in verse 12, he says, I will certainly be with you, and this will be a sign to you that I am the one who sent you. When you bring the people out of Egypt, you will all come and worship God on this mountain. What does God tell him? I don't care who you are. I'm going to be there. God tells him it doesn't matter who you are. What matters is who God is and that He's going to be there with you. It doesn't matter what the people of Israel think. It doesn't matter what you think about yourself. If God is behind it and He's calling you to do something and He's there, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you've done or what you think you've done or how inadequate you think you are. If God is calling you to a purpose and a reason and He is behind it, He will be there, and that is what matters. So Moses hears this and he goes, okay, so you're going to be with me. Then we get to verse 13. Moses asks God again, if I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is His name? What should I tell them? What is he asking? Okay, you're going to be with me, right? Well, who are you? Who are you? Who am I supposed to tell them you are? Now here's the thing. He knew the name of God. He knew who he was talking to. We saw that earlier. I read the passage from earlier where God says, I am the God of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses hid his face because he recognized it. Israel knew who God was. So when he shows up and says, hey, God sent me, the God of our father, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they're going to know who it is. So what is Moses asking here? He's not asking for the name of God. He's asking about God's character. What is your reputation? What actions do you have? I need proof. They knew, and he knew the names of God. But anybody can know a name, so what did he want? He wanted proof through God's reputation who He was. And did God deliver? The rest of this chapter, God explains who He is, and then He explains His plan in detail about how everything's going to happen every step of the way. And here's what God says. I am who I am. Now, when you first read that, you might think, that's pretty selfish. That's pretty self-centered. Like God is saying, I am who I am. Like you should know who I am. Like what is He saying there? Man, I wish it was that easy. I need about 3 weeks and 2 sermons to explain to you what I am that I am means. But I'm going to take a shot at it tonight and try to help you understand what it is. This word, these words that are here, I am who I am, is a word and a name that we have come to know called Yahweh. But Yahweh isn't even how you pronounce it. This is considered the unsayable name of God. Israel, the people of Israel would not even say it. In your Bibles, when you run across this name, it won't even say Yahweh. It'll say Lord with the capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. Because it is the unsayable name of God, the unspeakable name of God. And we use the word Yahweh, but that's not even what it was. They wouldn't even say it. All they said is the letters of the name. So they would spell it out. The way that you say this is Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh. Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh is what He claims to be. And this name is so deep and so in depth, it's crazy. I wish I could explain it to you. I wish I could try to help you to grasp what it is, but all I can do is just open the crack of the door so you can see in the cavernous of the meaning behind this name. But Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh shows us that God is the God who always was, who always is, who always will be. He is the God who is always faithful, the God who is always dependable. Yahweh, Yod, He, Wah, He, is so dense with meaning and implication that it's hard for us to even wrap our minds around it. So much so, they wouldn't even say it. It shows us that God is the God who exists, that God is the living God who is real, that He is the God that all things that exist depend on for their very life. He is Yod He Wah He. He is Yahweh. He is the great I am. I am who I am. In the New Testament, Jesus would go on and He would add to that. He would say, I am, which is this Yod He Wah He. And He would say, Yod He Wah He of life. I am the bread of life. I am. And He'd go through all of these I am statements about who God is and revealing Him to us. It is amazing and a powerful name that should have shaken Moses to his core. To hear that name uttered by God. It's amazing, this name. So, Moses says, well, who am I? God says, it doesn't matter, I'm with you. He says, well, who are you? I am who I am. I am the greatest. And he goes, all right. What if they don't believe me? Chapter 4, verse 1, Moses answered, okay, I see who you are. I see you are the I am who I am. What if they won't believe me and will not obey, but say, the Lord did not appear to you? What is Moses saying here? Do you really think he's worried about what they're going to say? No. He's getting to an end. He's trying to get to the ends of a mean. What he's really saying is, I don't believe you are who you are. I need more credentials. And God, being gracious, obliges, and He gives him 3 miracles. Now, I'm going to touch on these briefly, but again, I could spend a whole sermon. These passages we're covering is like 7 sermons in one. All right? So we're just doing an overview here. But He gives him 3 miracles. The first one is He tells him to take his staff and lay it on the ground, and it turns into a snake. And then he's told to pick it up by the tail and show it. And this is a very important miracle. Number 1, it showed Moses this, but it's going to show Israel and it's going to show Pharaoh. The serpent was an emblem of evil throughout the Old Testament. And by showing that Moses has mastery and God has mastery over this serpent, it shows that he has mastery over Satan and over the gods of Egypt. Very important miracle. The second miracle is God told him to take his hand and slide it into the breast of his cloak and to pull it out. And when he did, it was covered in leprosy. Now, leprosy at this time was a horrible skin-eating disease that was fatal. There was no cure. But it also involved any other skin disease that they could not understand. It says that when he pulled it out, his hand was white as ash and was about to look like he was going to crumble into pieces. When he pulled that out, he probably took a step back and couldn't believe what he saw. But then God told him to slide it back into his breast pocket and pull it out again, and it was healed. What it shows here is that God can deal with incurable diseases. It would bring the intrigue of all of the people, the fact that He could heal this uncurable disease in their mind. It was there, and it was something that they constantly worried about being in Egypt, and the heat and the dryness of the land around them, and they constantly worried about these things. It was constantly something that dwelt on their brain, and God was showing them, look, you don't even need to worry about this with me. Because not only can I give it freely, but I can heal it freely. And it shows us the power of God. The next one that He gave him is He told him to dump out some water. And the water became blood. This would be one of the most famous miracles in Egypt when they turned the Nile to blood. But this idea behind it is showing that the Nile was a very sacred element. It provided life to Egypt. It's what helped them be so successful and become so powerful, having this mighty river provide water and nourishment for them. So much so that they worshiped the river, and they even had a god that they worshiped that was the god of the Nile. And what God was showing through this miracle is that he not only had power over the vital resources, but he had power over the gods of Egypt. And so when Moses would take these three miracles, not only were they proof to him, they would be proof to Israel, and they would be proof to the Egypt that God is Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh, that he is who he says he is. And so you'd think at this point, Moses would go, okay, gotcha, let's do it. But no. He brings a fourth excuse to the table. Chapter 4, verse 10, he says, "But Moses replied to the Lord, 'Please, Lord, I have never been eloquent, either in the past or recently, since you have been speaking to your servant, because my mouth and my tongue are sluggish.'" He says, I don't want to speak in public. I'm not a good public speaker. I can't think fast enough. And God looks at him and God says, "Who do you think placed the mouth in the humans? Who do you think makes a person mute or deaf? Who makes them seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go and I will help you speak." And Moses looks at God. He's given 4 excuses and God has fixed them all. And we finally get to the truth behind the matter. We finally understand why Moses is asking all of these questions. In verse 13, Moses finally gets to the point in realizing that God is going to send him. He looks at God and he says, "Please, Lord, send someone else." God had just proven that Moses would be fine. He knew the history of who God was. But he says, "Please, Lord, send someone else." And in verse 14, it tells us that the Lord's anger burned against Moses. And he said, isn't Aaron the Levite your brother? I know that he can speak well, and also he is on his way to meet you. So he will rejoice when he sees you. You will speak to him and tell him what to say, and I will help you both speak and teach you what to do. So God's anger burned against Moses, but Moses wasn't off the hook. He goes, all right, I'll send somebody else with you. But you're still doing this. You're still going. I'm going to give you somebody that can speak eloquently for you. But you're still a part of this. Moses' faith, while it was strong throughout his life, he had very many weak points. He murdered a guy. He tried to run from God's call for his life. He, late in life, sinned against God and had a lack of faith. But God still used Moses. And he used him mightily. He was the original prophet. He got to see a glimpse of God from behind. Something that very few people can claim. He was the greatest patriarch. He rescued Israel from Egypt. He wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. And in the New Testament religious leaders, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they held his words in such high regard that they said Moses is greater than Jesus. God used him mightily. But yet, he struggled with faith. He murdered a man. But God still used him. And I want to very quickly go through a few points of application. And the first one is this. Oftentimes when we are sinning against God or challenging him or saying no to what he says, sometimes in his anger and his frustration towards us, God gives us exactly what we want. But in most of those cases, it's rarely a blessing. I think one of God's greatest consequences is giving us exactly what we want. Because he knows better. He knows better, but yet we're asking for something different. And so he goes, okay, let's give it to you. And we see he asked for somebody else. Please send somebody else. And so he did. He sent Aaron. But Aaron just caused nothing but problems. Throughout their journey, he would criticize Moses openly to the Israelites and cause strife between them. He was the one who led the people to build the golden calf at the bottom of Mount Sinai. He caused nothing but problems. And oftentimes in our life, when we beg God for something, when we're rejecting and refusing to do what He has asked us, He will often give us exactly what we want, but it won't be a blessing. It can be trouble sometimes. The second point of application is this: God knows us better than we know ourselves. And I think that's something that we forget. God is our creator. God knitted us together in our mother's womb. He knows you better than you know yourself, and we have to come to the point where we trust and obey Him because He knows what's best. The next point of application, I think, is one that we often forget. When we go to God and we tell Him our weaknesses, when we make excuses as to why we can't talk to that friend at work, to that friend at school, to the person at the gas station, why we can't serve in a life group, why we can't serve on a Thursday night, when we go and we give God these excuses and we tell Him, well, here's my problem, here's where I'm weak at. God, don't you know that I'm not here? The truth is, we aren't telling Him anything He doesn't already know. We're telling Him the exact things that He needs to hear. But He already knows them. It's not like He's caught off guard by the fact that I'm not a good public speaker. It's not the fact that He's caught off guard that you're shy and don't have the courage to walk up and talk to somebody. He knows. He knows. He already knows those things. But here's the beautiful thing. Because He knows, wherever the will of God calls you, He will never lead you where His power cannot enable you. The will of God will never lead you to where the power of God can't enable you. He knows you better than you know yourself. He knows your weaknesses. So when He calls you to do something, guess what? He's going to give you the power to do it. He's going to give you the strength to push forward. You just have to take that step in faith and trust in Him. So if He's calling you to do something, trust Him. Obey Him. Because His power will sustain you. You know, the power of God, or the will of God, will never call us to a place where His power can't enable us. And I can't think of a greater example of this than sin. Adam and Eve were created by God to be perfect, and they sinned and they brought corruption into this world. But here's the deal. God wanted that relationship. He wanted to have a relationship with them and with us. And so His power came and it provided a way that we could restore that relationship. He sent His Son to live the perfect life, to die on the cross for us, to pay the penalty for our sin. He rose again on the third day to defeat death, to restore that relationship that we have with God. Because He knew that we had gone to a place where we needed His power. He knew that we had gone to a place, and He knew that we were weak, and the only way out was for Him to provide a way. And He did that through His Son. So tonight, if you don't know Jesus, if you haven't trusted Him as your Savior, I'm telling you, God is calling you to Him. Just like He called Moses. Hey, I want you to go and do this for me. Hey, I want you to come and trust me. And guess what? I've taken care of everything. Just like God showed Moses. Don't worry about who you are. I'm with you. Well, give me some proof. What is your reputation? I am who I am. Okay, what if they don't believe us? Here's some proof. He's done it all for you. Through His Son on the cross. His power is there ready to enable you. All you have to do is step out and believe and trust in Him. Because if God can use Moses, who murdered an Egyptian, and who told God to His face, yeah, I don't want to do what you want me to do. Who made excuse after excuse after excuse, and then sat there and said, just send somebody else, please. Don't send me. And yet God turned him into one of the greatest leaders of all time. He can surely do amazing things with you. Maybe the first step tonight is to trust Him as your Savior. Let's bow together in prayer. Here in just a minute, Chris is going to come up and he's going to give the announcements. And after he gives the announcements, we're going to dismiss. But the invitation here at Valley never ends. And myself and Chris and Ben and Brandon Gover and Macy and a few others are going to be up here sitting at the stage. And if tonight you feel God is calling you to something, maybe it's to trust Him as your Savior. Maybe He's calling you to serve. Maybe He's calling you into ministry. Maybe He's calling you to talk to a person at work or at school. We're going to be up here for you to come and talk to. For you to come and ask for help, for prayer, to learn how you can trust God fully. Or maybe tonight you just need somebody to talk to. Your life is flipped upside down and you don't know right from wrong, you don't know left from right or up from down. And you just need somebody to come and talk to and listen to you and maybe give you a few words of wisdom. We will be here for you guys.